welcome everyone to today's webinar. Don't worry, you haven't missed anything. We were just doing a bit of a warm-up, but welcome to today's webinar, How to Properly Assess Agent Performance. I'm Rachel and I'm going to be your webinar chairperson today. So delighted to welcome our brilliant panel of experts today, and welcome back to Gary Gormley from Fab Solutions. Welcome, Gary.
Hey folks, I hate when people call me an expert. It raises expectation, Rachel.
I don't know how to downgrade you now. Do you want to give a bit of an introduction anyway?
Oh, absolutely. So yes, I'm Gary Gormley and I'm a big fan of Call Center Helper. I think it's a really useful resource for anybody in the contact center industry. And I've been in the contact center for 20 something years now, I think it is. And it's a fabulous industry and one that I'm deeply proud to be involved in, and doing things like this is really, really great to be part of. So thanks very much for inviting me back.
Oh, well, delighted to have you back. And also delighted to welcome to her first webinar with us, but I'm sure not the last, Rita Elbridge from Core Miner. Welcome.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm really happy to be here.
Brilliant.
I've been either in or adjacent to the contact center space probably for about as long as Gary. And it's always really exciting to get to talk about, some of the things that we're doing and facing and the things we've got going on at Call Miner. And, we're all trying to march to the same goals. So.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me. Before we get started on today's webinar, just a few housekeeping bits. We are taking a recording of today's webinar, and that will be available later on this afternoon on callcenterhelper.com/articles/recorded-webinars. That will also be where the slides will be available. I know lots of people are asking about slides in the chat room, so they'll be available on this page later this afternoon. If you're not already in our chat room, there seems to be lots of chat going on, so I definitely recommend being in there. You just need to click the chat button and you can chat with our panelists and you can chat with all the audience members as well. A great reason to be in the chat room is that we run a prize for the best tip. So share your top tips for assessing agent performance. You just need to put #tip for that, or if you want to ask our panel a question, just write the #question, and the winner gets an Amazon gift card. So always good. We send them out far and wide. I believe last month it went to the Philippines. So yes, always good. So before we start, I'm just going to run a quick poll. So I'm going to launch that now. And that is, how are you currently measuring agent performance in your contact center? Is it contact center platform stats? Is it spreadsheets, manual monitoring, interaction analytics, or other forms of input? I realise I've left it as a single choice, so apologies. It was supposed to be multi-choice, so it might be slightly skewed. Gary, what are your thoughts, despite my blunder?
You know what, I think I see a lot in terms of contact center platform stats. And running those reports within your telephony system, be that around productivity or pulling that performance from conversion levels from your CRM. So I think there's a lot of automation that can happen in your contact center platform stats, but I do also see still quite a bit of spreadsheets. So if you're answering spreadsheets, don't be too downhearted. It still happens.
Yeah. So I'm gonna end that now and share the results. Yep, 44% of people saying contact center platform stats, 26% saying spreadsheets, 18% manual monitoring, 10% interaction analytics, and 2% other forms of input. So yeah, Gary, I think you were looking over my shoulder. Fab. I'm going to stop sharing that, and I think perfect time to hand over the baton to yourself.
Wow, here we go. So there's my test of whether or not I can use the share screen button. And I can. Wonderful. There we go. So everybody should be able to see my screen. So lovely to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me along. And this is a really important topic in terms of how do we accurately assess agent performance in the contact center. And I've been around long enough to have seen it probably not done on an abacus, because that would be saying I'm far too long in the tooth. Despite the beard, I am but a young man, a young whippersnapper. So what I want to talk about today is different ways that I've seen contact centers using performance and using different tools to manage performance, and the different metrics that we typically tend to see in the contact center. So when we look at contact center metrics and when we look at how we manage and we measure agent performance, we typically tend to see these tend to fall into four main camps. And if you're anything like what we do in our contact center, it will be around things like productivity stats. It will be things around maybe customer experience stats, around maybe CSAT, NPS, retention rates for customers, how many people are leaving, or it could be something like quality statistics. And this is quite a common one, that people have quality assurance metrics that they need to look at. They'll have maybe cancellation rates or customer feedback that they're looking to assess the agents on. And then lastly, you might find that they form into performance. And that very much depends on the type of contact center you might be. It might be around adherence, it might be around utilization, it might be around conversion. And I think when we start to look at all of these things, there's multiple things that fall within all of these. And I'm going to share some examples of that shortly. But what I want to understand first, before we go into that, is actually, what do you measure in your contact center? So we've got a poll here, is to say, where do the majority of your metrics sit? And Rachel's kindly popped that up onto the screen for us now, so you can cast your votes now.
Yeah. So Gary, what are you expecting to see, or hoping, perhaps?
I'm expecting to see probably more around productivity. And maybe second, I would say perhaps would be quality, and then maybe customer experience, and then maybe performance. But we'll see. Okay. Trying to influence anybody's vote at all.
Right. Last few votes coming in. Share the results. So yeah, 36% productivity, 26% performance, 24% quality, and 14% customer experience.
Yeah, so that's the interesting mix there, is to say customer experience versus performance, and do they fall into a similar camp? I think when we look at customer experience, we look at customer satisfaction results, we look at NPS results, we look at customer ease scores. I think those metrics, perhaps at more of a senior level on more senior dashboards, probably tend to get shouted out a little bit more. But from an agent perspective, it definitely tends to be probably more around that performance, quality, and productivity aspect. So let's have a think then, and think about how we can start to monitor this and how we start to look at what the landscape is. So when we looked at the last UK decision makers guide for 2023, it started to get a little bit of a flavour of what that landscape is for contact center metrics. There's probably a few different things to pull out from that survey. And if we look at what's on the screen here, you've got various different metrics running along the side. And I thought it'd be useful just to share for those people that might not have seen this this report that's come out, what some of the averages and some of the medians are that are coming into the mix when we're looking at some of those metrics. And I think it's useful then to kind of compare that against what your own personal KPIs are, what your own personal targets are against some of these. And some of the ones that are on the left-hand side there might be ones that you use, might be ones that you don't use. I typically tend to see people looking at average speed to answer. Definitely tend to see people looking at first call abandonment rate and first call resolution. What typically tends to probably not feature as heavily is maybe the cost of an inbound call or the cost of an outbound call, because how can our agents really actively influence that? So I thought that'd be useful to share, just to kind of give people a little bit of a context of where some of the market is, certainly in the UK. And I imagine it's very similar across different countries, different states, and you'll probably see some similar results. But I thought what was even more interesting to share is how metrics have changed over time. And if I show you some of the stats here from the same report, it's showing what are the most important contact center metrics that we tend to measure. And if we think about this maybe 4-5 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, we'll have probably seen profit very high up there. So that cost per call. And when we think about how contact centers have evolved from being contact centers and profit centers to more value adding centers, I think this demonstrates that there is a shift in the types of metrics that we're looking at, in the things that are becoming more important to contact center senior leaders and to agents, and also things that are becoming more important to the actual customer themselves. Because you can see right down there at the bottom that 38% of contact center metrics are centered around customer satisfaction and NPS, which is similar to the outcomes of some of the polls that we've seen there, especially when you start to look at what those top three are in terms of first call resolution, a call abandonment rate, and agent quality scores being in that top four. So it's interesting to see where those different types of contact center metrics are flowing and how important they are to different contact centers. And then if we think about what metrics have we got? So I'll just do that for effect again one more time. But we've got so many metrics. Where do we start? And we've got all of these little balls that have just fallen down onto the screen there. And we've got AHT, we've got talk time, we've got complaints, we've got retention, we've got quality metrics. There's a whole host of things. And if you think back to the brackets that we've spoken about as to where they fit in terms of those four main categories, you could probably link some of these together and say, right, actually, those ones fall under productivity, those ones fall under customer, those ones fall under performance, and you can start to plot some of these out. And this is just me dumping 12 different metrics onto the screen. But if you start to think about your own contact center and all of the different metrics you've got, you can probably add a whole host of things to this. So what does that mean in respect to our agents and how we actually accurately assess performance? Well, the danger is with that what gets measured gets managed. And this is one of my favorite quotes, but in the context of what I'm saying here, there is a danger to it, because actually if we are measuring our agents against all of those things, it becomes really dangerous to actually start to understand what actually matters. And Peter Drucker is one of my favorite people to quote, and I always quote Peter Drucker. I always quote this quote, what gets measured gets managed, because actually we as a contact center, we love to measure things and we love to manage things that we need to measure. But there is a danger when we've got so many metrics out there that we are over measuring and we're laboring too much importance on some of the metrics that might not necessarily have much meaning to customers and may cloud some of the conversations that we have, and we become metric driven in our conversations rather than people driven in some of our conversations. So we have to ask ourselves, what should we be measuring? What is it that matters in the contact center? And there's another Peter Drucker quote, which is measure what matters, which is why I put the first one in there in terms of what gets measured gets managed. There is another one saying measure what matters. But how do we really truly define what matters in the contact center in terms of understanding what those outcomes are that we want for our people, what those outcomes we want for our business, and what outcomes we want for our customers? And we have to really start to unpick some of the metrics that we've got in the contact center and start to think about how important they are, and how we can start to control and influence some of those, and actually are some of those nice to have, and which are the ones that are the really important metrics. It's like in the army, isn't it? It's like, what are the really important orders versus what are the not so important orders, and how do we kind of separate the good ones from the not so good ones? So here is a rule of thumb for thinking about how we start to define what matters in the contact center. So like I said there, we have to measure what really matters, and we have to think about that in terms of the outcomes that we want to deliver. How does that metric link to the outcome that we're trying to strive for, either the customer, for the business, for productivity, or for efficiency? So what's the outcome that we're looking for from that metric? What behavioral shift are we trying to drive from monitoring and measuring that metric? And then once we've defined what some of those outcomes are, we have to actually then think, have we got the resources and have we got the tools to be able to clearly measure that performance over a period of time? And are we seeing improvements, or are we seeing that as a very volatile metric? And is it the right metric to be using when we're starting to think about agent performance? Case in point, for example, the cost per call. Is that something that an agent can influence? And is that something that can be really managed on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, however you choose to define those metrics and how clearly you want to measure them? And then we have to think about that from a customer's perspective. are the metrics that we're referring to and are the metrics that we're looking at our agent performance based on, are they driving the right customer behaviors? Are they customer focused, or are they internally focused on us and the profit of the business and how efficient we are? And is it driving the right behavior? And I'll talk to you about an example of that when we talk about things like AHT. Quite often we'll try and drive down average handling time. And the unintended consequence of that could well be that we start to strip out some of the empathy from agent calls. We start maybe blind transferring calls because we want to keep that call down because we're trying to keep within an average handling time balance. So it could have a negative impact on the customer. So when we're starting to think about the KPIs that we introduce and the metrics that we manage, are they customer focused? And actually, are we setting people up to fail by introducing some of these metrics? So what's the tolerance that we're looking at when we're starting to measure some of those metrics, and is it achievable in the time frame that we're looking at, and is it achievable in terms of the number and the KPI that we're looking for? And you have to look at the spread of people when you're looking at that to say, right, how many people are achieving, how many people are underachieving, and how many people are overachieving on that, and then start to move your KPI and your tolerance based on some of those unders and overs. And then the last one is, are we inspecting what we expect? So are we coaching people? Are we monitoring performance on a regular basis? Or are we looking at KPIs and then just leaving them to it? And if we are, or rather, if we aren't monitoring and inspecting those metrics in the right way, then you can argue, what is the point in having that metric in the first place? So are we just measuring things for measuring's sake, which goes back to what gets measured gets managed, but actually really clearly defining what metrics are the important metrics so we can measure what matters. So if we think about that and we think about how that relates to people and people performance, we have to think about the different aspects when we're looking at evaluating the people that we've got in the team and their competence and their confidence and their tenure within the business. So I break this down into 3 core areas. One is the level of potential with that agent. So where are they in the competency rating of their kind of career? Are they new to the business? Are they on some sort of performance plan? How are we evaluating their potential within the business, and how are we actually approaching those conversations to really get a true measure of whether or not they're capable of achieving that target? Then we have to look at the level of performance. So when we look at that level of performance, we're looking at that on a number of metrics. We're looking at that based on the average performance of the team, how many people are going over and above that metric, and how many people have we got in that bracket that might be underperforming, because that might give us an indication as to whether or not we're overreaching or we're overstretching people based on the requirement of the business and what's been rolled out as a KPI by maybe senior leadership. Are we actually seeing that level of performance on a sustained basis by the right volume of people? And traditionally, we should be seeing 75% of people should be consistently achieving on those metrics. And if it starts to shift from that, then there could be a training issue, there could be a coaching issue, or it could be more of a systemic issue in the number that we're trying to achieve just isn't there. And that ties in nicely with some of the potential. And then we have to think about the level of trust and autonomy we give people with the metrics that we've assigned to them. So are we making sure that people have the accountability, the autonomy to manage their own performance, or are we micromanaging people? And if we're having to micromanage people against those metrics, there's probably something in there in terms of a capability or a trust issue within the leadership team, or a trust issue within that particular person. And how are we then accounting for that with those people? So that brings us to another section there in terms of how we then identify if it's a trust issue or a potential conduct issue. Are we confusing skills with conduct issues? So is it a skill problem or is it a will problem? So do the people that we've got in the team have the right level of competency? Have we trained them in the right way? Have they got the right level of potential to be able to achieve the objectives and the things that we've got? And have we given them the right skills and the right training to be able to demonstrate those competencies and those KPIs on a regular basis? Or, as is the nature of contact centers sometimes, are people choosing not to deliver and people choosing not to perform? Or are they manipulating or gaming the system based on the requirements that you've put in? So what we commonly see here is if we putting a KPI of you need to do X amount of dials on the dialer, or you need to make X amount of outbound calls. Are people choosing to game the system and manipulate their figures just to achieve those KPIs? And actually, if they're doing that, we need to understand what the root cause of that is. Is that because we've set a target that's too high? Is it because they don't necessarily see that the target has any meaning? Are we actually even following up on the KPIs that we've asked? Which means people start to behave in a particular way that's not necessarily conducive to good performance and good practice. So a quick poll question for everybody. What do you think is impacting your team's performance more?
Right, yes, so I've just launched it. Skill, will, or other. I mean, other, if you can write in the chat room. Gary, I don't know whether it's what are you expecting to see as opposed to what are you hoping to see?
I'm expecting to see skill. I'd be very surprised if there was a big number in will, because I don't think the vast majority of people game the system as much as we think they might. But let's see. There might be a big cohort in other, you never know.
Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. And unfortunately,
Oh, wow.
48% saying will. It was actually an even bigger gap when we first started chatting. 42% saying skill and 10% saying other. So other engagement, resourcing issues, have low morale, not enough employees, too many calls, work environment culture. Teresa said I have a combination of 1 and 2. I think Jenna said we have a relatively new workforce, which I think might have that impact.
Yeah. And I think that's an interesting split. I mean, it's still quite close. It's closer than I would like, but it's an interesting split. And when we start to think about how we can maybe tackle some of those things, we have to think about, and I'm going ahead of myself there, we have to think about the tenure of some of the individuals that we've got in the team. So when we look at speed to competency, and when we look at people's experience in the call center, we tend to start in this bottom left-hand corner. So we start with people that are relatively new to the role. They might be really excited about having a new job. They might be a little bit apprehensive about, can I do the job? Have I signed up to what I've signed up? And we belay some of those fears, and we belay some of that that skepticism about have I gone for the right job, by providing some of the induction, providing some of the support, attesting to those skills, and maybe putting them in some sort of grad bay style environment where they're learning and they're honing the skills. They're still relatively nervous. They're new to the business, and they need a lot of support. And when we start moving through that competency curve, people start to build their confidence, and they start to develop their skills, and we give them the rubber stamp that we've signed you off from induction, and we've signed you off from graduation, and we've let them loose. And then we tend to find over time that people find their feet. It all starts clicking into place, and with some right coaching and some right support, people start to become high performers, or at least achieving on performance, and they realize that, yep, we've got this and we've done it. But I think the key point that I need to impress on this one is, when we look at this structure, and when we look at and we measure our speed to competency of our agents in line with what we expect when we accurately assess their performance, are we being really clear at each stage of this spectrum about what's expected? Have we adjusted our expectation? And what do we do when it starts to go wrong? How do we start to intervene, and how do we start to coach and support and develop those people? And have we given our team leaders the right skills to be able to tease out some of those problems, tease out some of those challenges, feedback and coach in the right way? And I think that's one of the things that we need to look at when we're starting to think about the employee journey, is what's our expectation in terms of speed to competency, and have we allowed for that within our resource models, and are we being fair to our people as we go through that journey? So then overall, I think if I was to summarize some of the key steps to pulling this together, and actually really starting to think about how we can approach agent competency and agent metrics and assess them in the right way, I think we really have to go back to that point that I made right at the start point, is there's so much that we can measure in the contact center. So we really have to define what matters for each of the relevant roles within our business, within our contact center, whether that's sales role, customer service role, a quality assessor role. What are the key metrics that we're looking for, and really defining what matters, and then following up on that with good leadership, good best practice and inspecting what we expect and giving the right feedback at the right time, and really starting to have some of those micro interventions that we talked about that nip some of those behaviors maybe in the bud and support people in the right way. And then from that, we have to think about the expectation of people and their journey and their competency and role, and actually adjust some of our expectations based on their experience, based on the tenure, based on some of the journey that they might be going through, and maybe some of the changes to roles and changes to new systems and stuff, because that might impact their overall kind of understanding of KPIs and their ability to do the job. And then finally, we need to wrap that all around with some recognition and praise for when things are going really, really well, and really incentivize people by making sure that we're recognizing where good work is being done. We are recognizing, rewarding, and praising that. So that's just kind of my take on how we can accurately assess agent performance. And thank you all very much for listening. And I hope, Rachel, I stuck to time.
You were perfect. Great. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Yeah, thank you so much, Gary. Perfectly on time. And I mean, your last poll, I think the chat room has gone wild with their other suggestions. So,
wow.
But we've also had lots of questions and tips come in, so I'm going to try and whistle through some of those. So we've had a question in, what are your thoughts about self-review? Gary,
you know what, I think self-reflection is a really good tool. I think you've got to be in a particularly key state of competence in order to do that, because if you're relatively new to the business, you've not got much context in which to self-review. But I think when you're looking at your own performance and thinking, right, actually, where am I in comparison to my colleagues, and what can I do myself to improve that, and almost do some self-mentoring, say, right, actually, this is what I want to do, and this is where I think I'm performing, and this is what I think I could do more of or less of, I think is a really good technique.
Yeah, and Risa, can technology help with this side of it?
Absolutely, yeah. We focus a lot on enabling our agents to self-review, or more often to review in their own time, right? To be provided the nuggets, and then when the time is available, make it so that they can review those, quickly and often, and try to correct or promote good behavior.
Yeah, and do you think it needs then someone to kind of check these self-reviews afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, I think to Gary's point, right, your self-review is really all about your self-awareness too, and your competency with the questions and areas that you're working in. So if you're new, to Gary's point, it's going to be really hard to know if you're moving in the right direction. So yeah, I think it's important to have that check in place.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So Holly sent in a tip. One of my best tips is to address the situation as soon as it occurs, so the behavior can be corrected to avoid continued mistakes. Make journals so you remember positive and negative behaviors when it is time for the semi-annual annual review. Risa, I mean, this is we're coming onto your presentation.
I feel like Holly has access to my slides.
We will come back to that. So Teresa said, we have agents sitting side by sides with agents that do well in their metrics, hoping to have them share tips and tricks. We also email communications with tips and tricks that we have learned from agents that are doing the job. Yeah, I think that's great. Samantha's asked a question. What is the best way to measure efficiency when the agents are multi-skilled across a variety of channels, and particularly when a business tends to be seasonal with a huge peak at Christmas, but not enough work to go around over the summer? Risa, any thoughts?
I think, right, so age-old contact center challenge is how do we be consistent in the way that we measure. We tend to look at the measurements by channel, but then also holistically across the customer journey, right? Because a lot of times you'll see customers using multiple forms of communication. So we want to look at that in both. But I think you really need to really assess what's going on at the channel by channel level, at least as the baseline, and then bubble that up from there.
Yeah. I think there's an extra point there as well, Rachel, that I think can be used, is to say some of the productivity metrics that you look at for agents being active. So when you're on either chat, email, voice, you might be unavailable when you're in a chat situation or an email situation, but actually you're on a task and you're on an activity. So looking at the disposition codes or the productivity code or the idle codes that people are in can give you an idea of, are you efficient as in customer facing efficient, or are you in idle and doing admin? And I think to the last point around peaks and troughs and trends, I think that's where you have some really good opportunity to have some discussions with your workforce planning team, if you're fortunate enough to have a team, to say, right, actually, if we know there are peaks at certain times and lulls in other areas, how are we using that resource, and can we distribute that with time back or different types of scheduling to allow for that efficiency gain?
Brilliant, thank you both. So as you can see, lots and lots of tips. I'm going to try and whistle through a few more. I have developed a performance-related pay level structure that focus on the metrics just being discussed, but is also heavily weighted towards behaviours. Drive the right behaviours and performance will take care of itself. Terry said, get your team involved in planning, changes and implementation, keep feedback regular for opportunity for development and feedback. Sometimes weekly/monthly HIG chats, how's it going, are really beneficial for this and building trust and confidence with our team. And then last one, Barbara says, don't meet with agents only if an error was made, build relationships, which I think is a brilliant one. You know, you don't want them to always think of you as coming in when there's a negative. Gary?
Yeah, I think there's always one of those things, isn't it? I always say to that, if you only ever take somebody off into a room, or you organize a Teams call when there's something wrong, then it's only going to build that anxiety when you actually start to do that. So I think that's a great point from Barbara.
Brilliant. Well, oh god, goodness me, look at all those tips.
Lots of tips.
We will come back to those in a bit, but I want to hand over the baton now to Risa to take us through her presentation.
Great, thanks.
Stop sharing.
All right. I was trying to watch as many of the tips as I could as we were going, and they were really great. So I love the engagement. We're going to talk about some of those same things here in this presentation, and I'm super happy to be here to talk about feedback. So let's get going. I always like to start with a quote. So remember that the way that your employees feel is the way your customers will feel. Your customer care reps are the first and sometimes the only contact your customers will have with your company and your brand. And so when your employees are engaged and feel valued and heard and are empowered to truly put customer service and satisfaction at the forefront, they're going to be happier. But when your employees are happy, they can project that attitude in their engagements with your customers. So I'm super happy that we're finally past the point where we think about the contact center as a cost of doing business and more as an opportunity to strengthen relationships with our customers. I think that's been a really great transition over the last, it's probably been happening for the last 10 years or so. It's great. But to do that, we need to make sure that we're empowering our care reps to deliver the exceptional customer experiences. Whoop. See, this is what happens. Get ahead of myself. So one of the biggest factors in improving those experiences in how we coach our agents. When we engage with our clients here at CallMiner, we follow many of the same guiding principles that Gary just walked us through to successfully coach. And this really goes for agent performance as much as any of the other members on teams that you're working on. If you're not a manager of a contact center team, but you're in the space, analyst, that sort of thing. There's 3 guiding principles that we're really going to talk through. First recommendation is to keep it simple. Second, we always want to promote engagement within our team. And finally, focus on the outcomes that the metrics will enable you to achieve. So poll question. What's your primary reason for not coaching your agents, or if you're an agent, not being coached in your role? I went through and I don't know, there's probably 7 or 8 choices here, but and I made a single choice. Now there's probably many reasons why we don't do it, but there's one that's top of mind. I saw a couple come through in the questions while Gary was giving his presentation. But
yeah, so we've got supervisors are too busy, agents don't have enough time, Our agents don't need coaching. Call volumes are always too high. It's too hard to coach remotely. I don't know how to coach, or we never miss an opportunity to coach. I won't ask your thoughts because I'm guessing that you're hoping for something. So I will end the poll in a minute.
I'm hoping for we never miss an opportunity, but I'm a realist, so I suspect it's one of the other ones.
So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. Yeah, 43% saying supervisors are too busy, 28% saying call volumes are always too high, 17% we never miss an opportunity to code. So top three, that's nice. Pretty good.
Right, that's awesome. For those that never miss an opportunity to coach, kudos to you. I think that's where we all want to be, but as we'll see, we'll get to the reasons why all the time. So there we go. So, as I said, when we dig deeper into the reasons why we don't coach, the overwhelming reason we don't prioritize coaching, we looked at all of those reasons, is likely because we're making it too hard. As a manager, supervisor, or team lead, your primary responsibility is to your team and to enable them to meet and hopefully exceed all of their objectives at a personal, team, and business level. This is a lot of responsibility. With all that responsibility, it should come as no surprise that 70% of the variance in a team's performance is due to management. Now, that's not just you, but that's everyone in management at your company. You, however, have the most direct opportunity to help reduce the variance. And so what we want to look at is the realities of coaching, right? And we just talked about them. The manager needs to sift through interactions. You probably need to listen to a few calls. Hopefully you find some that have the behaviors that need fixing. Maybe you only find the ones that need fixing and you don't find any of the good ones. Maybe you find the only one that was the one conversation that this particular agent had that has the problem. And you build a whole coaching conversation around that single less than stellar interaction. Then that becomes the call that gets used for coaching. That coaching session is scheduled for a time later in the week. And then as the second most popular piece, when the time rolls around for that, the queue's full, you can't take your agent off the phone and you reschedule it. In reality, it probably gets canceled altogether, but maybe not. Maybe we move it to next week. So now it's been 2 weeks since this particular call happened. As the agent, you don't remember anything about what was going on in that one particular interaction. So now you're being coached on something 2 weeks after it happened. You've probably been making that same mistake or executing that same behavior the whole time. So now you've formed a habit, and we all know how hard habits are to break. What we advocate, and as Gary mentioned, and obviously what we enable here at CallMiner, is regular coaching based on goals that align to the overall business objectives. We aim to provide that feedback as close to the time of the interaction as possible. Ideally, the coaching feedback is small enough to be actionable really quickly. Even better is if the agents have the tools to coach themselves. And there are a couple of ways to enable this quick turnaround time on coaching. So there are times when it makes sense to try to coach the agent while an interaction is in progress. We want to use those really selectively, though, to avoid distraction and not detract from the overall customer experience. If there's a pop-up coming every 10 seconds, it's going to be really hard to focus on having a natural flowing conversation. There are times, however, when it's really helpful to give a nudge while a call is in progress. Compliance requirements or new offerings are a great opportunity to offer real-time guidance. It's also really great for new agents who maybe are still getting familiar with processes, systems, and scripts. And again, we really want to make it meaningful. But for most things, though, we want to coach during the downtime, in between calls, small snippets, small breaks, that sort of thing. But as I've been saying, it's really important to make the coaching consumable and actionable. And it really should be positive as well as corrective. I love seeing the tips coming in that we want to engage with our teams for both the good and the not so good. So when you analyze all of the agents' interactions and you can evaluate performance and effectiveness across that entire set, whether it's calls, emails, chats, whatever else you're doing, and then you can see and dig into the details of the specific interactions that maybe weren't so great, those are your coaching nuggets. You also get the added benefit of seeing all the great interactions, and you can send a kudos or tag those to be used for future training for your other agents. So the guys that were sitting side by sides and trying to share tips and tricks is a really great way to enable some of that using real live interactions to foster those conversations. At the end of the day, you use your tools to raise the bar of the entire team. Even if you don't have all the tools that you might want at your disposal, right? In the beginning, we saw that a lot of people are still using, are using spreadsheets, and a lot of our customers come to us with spreadsheets and manual forms. You can still make a concerted effort to remove the barriers to effective coaching by keeping things really simple. Any improvement is usually meaningful. So we know we have a lot of excuses about why we're not coaching. I think I kind of assumed that the one that was going to come up to the top of the list was that I don't have time. So as we said, the best coaching is made up of small bits of feedback over time, provide the insights, and then, as Gary said, measure and monitor those behaviors specific to the insights so that you can guide and gauge the performance. If you do this over time, you'll notice when those behaviors start to reappear, and then you can correct them or self-correct them even faster. At the end of the day, we can only improve in what we measure. And if it's worth measuring, it's worth analyzing and optimizing, right? So keep that in mind. Now that we've talked a little bit about simplifying coaching, let's talk about engagement. That's our second pillar, right? I put this stat up because it was staggering to me when I saw it. Only 15% of employees across the world are engaged in their jobs. Let's let that sink in for a second. If we use the attendees of this webinar as a guide, when I last looked, there were about 230 folks on the call. Quick math tells me that means that there's 35 of us that are engaged in our job, which means there's 195 folks who really aren't. How do you feel about your spot and your engagement? Are you in the 15% or are you in the 85%? How many people are on your team and in your organization? And if you looked at that group, how would you assess their levels of engagement? If we take this stat with the prior one, where 70% of the variance in a team's performance is due to management, and we assume that engagement affects performance, we can see that there's a lot of room for managers to use engagement to improve the overall employee experience. But how do we do that? So generally speaking, right, supervisors coach agents on the latest topic, maybe 2 days after the last topic, depending on where you're at. Agents aren't super receptive to the coaching. Maybe they've got other, too many things coming at them, lots of calls, lots of things going on. And performance at best stays the same, but likely decreases yet again. When we talk about engagement, a large part is about being consistent. It applies to a lot of areas. It's being consistent in the frequency of the coaching, as we've talked about, the messaging that you're giving, and the way that you're giving it. Remember the old adage, if everything is important, then nothing is important. We don't have the ability to separate those things. So if we're changing priorities every day, and I get it, we all don't have the ability to set the priorities sometimes, or we're saying that everything is a priority, it's difficult to pick those specific areas to improve. There's also really no time to assess and manage the messaging. When we focus on being emotionally intelligent in coaching, it forces us to be consistent and to look at things from everyone's perspective. It also sets the stage for our agents to practice emotional intelligence with our customers, which is a great win for everyone. So emotional intelligence, more than any other factor, more than even IQ or expertise, accounts for 85 to 90% of success at work. You've probably been sitting through a lot of conversations of late on emotional intelligence. There's a ton of content in the workplace these days, sessions and webinars like these and just internal meetings. This slide contains some of the hallmarks of what being emotionally intelligent means. But when we talk about it, it's a two-way street, right? So people can be emotionally intelligent, but they have to be in an organization that promotes it in order to truly realize the benefits. As we think about these bullets, think about them not only from the employee or manager perspective, but also from your organizational perspective. We ask our employees to be emotionally intelligent, to accept criticism, to share feelings, to solve problems in a creative way. But does the organization actually foster that behavior? Do we give our employees room to express opinions and ideas, or do we penalize people for setting boundaries? Right? Obviously, there's a line you have to draw, right? You're there to do a job, and you can't just not do it. But organizations that we work with, that we see empower their employees to make decisions and encourage them to take calculated risks, and give them the space to do that are the ones that have the happiest employees. Remember what we said at the beginning, employees transfer their attitudes to your customers, right? So we want to have, happy employees. To foster the environment that we want to always coach our customers to, to foster the environment that we coach our customers to always coach towards engagement. So we ask that we want to define and communicate a powerful vision, and we want to demonstrate how our everyday, seemingly mundane tasks align to the overall vision. We want to understand people's strengths. Everyone's different. Most of the time we embrace those differences. It's difficult to do that when we're trying to achieve continuity of experience, but remember, everyone brings something unique to the table, and it's the combination of all of those attributes that make a great team. We want to give people the resources to do their jobs well. When we talk about building great teams, we talk about people, processes, and tools. Does your team have the right processes and tools to perform their best? Have you asked them? Sometimes we're too quick to assume that things are good, right? People get used to working with what they have, and they just think that's the way it's going to be forever, so they don't actually speak up. Ask. Checking in regularly, especially after things change, will help you understand your team better. Also starts to build a really great relationship with your team members. Next up, communicate regularly and with transparency. And this is probably my number one takeaway, and the one that I work on the most with my own team. When we're wrapped up in something day after day after day, we forget that not everybody has the same level of knowledge or engagement or involvement in that particular topic. We have to consciously focus on sharing what we know, right? It's in your brain, you just know it. That doesn't trickle down unless you actually communicate it. So share what you know, and share the good things and the not so good, right? We want to be equal in the things that we offer. And finally, I saw this in the tips coming through as well. Ask for opinions, ideas, and feedback. Everyone has ideas. Not all of them will be feasible, but there's usually a stepping stone somewhere in there that you could offer and implement that will help improve things even just a little bit. We talked about engagement at the beginning of the engagement surveys at the beginning of the webinar. A lot of companies are obviously doing those to assess performance. I'm not going to go through this list of questions now, but ask these questions of yourselves and think about how your teams would answer them. And if you're not asking them on a corporate scale, maybe take the initiative to start on a smaller scale and try to make improvements from the bottom up as opposed to the top down. Those small things are really going to add up. And as I said, it's going to show that you're invested as a leader and a manager in your team, and that attitude will propagate. So last piece, focusing on outcomes. When we don't know why we do things, we tend to do the things we think will solve the problem we see as quickly as possible. Most of the time, it's not nefarious, right? No one's setting out to do bad things, just folks don't know any better. And the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. If we're communicating effectively and clearly, and people know why the things they're doing matter and how they impact the bottom line or the top line, we'll have fewer silos, a lot more conversations. So how do we improve our coaching outcomes? First, set a clear message from the top down. Everyone should be speaking the same way and understand the company's vision and goals. Next, ask your team how they're solving problems. People don't often realize that they've been doing something wrong. Show them the examples of the good and the not so good, so they have something real and tangible to refer to in both instances, right? We want to point out the bad things, but we also want to give examples of the good things. Hopefully there's more good things than not so good things, but give examples of both. Third one, identify your vocal team members. Make sure that they're spreading the right message, right? People are naturally gravitating to those folks, right? The folks that are talking and offering assistance. We want them to be offering the right assistance, and make sure that matches the goals that you're being asked to achieve. But don't forget your silent types, right? Like we said, there's a balance of folks in your organization. That's what makes up a great team. You've got some folks that won't be as vocal, but you need to check in with them as well. Without the right guidance, they will continue to do the same thing over and over. It might be the right thing, but it might not. You probably also find that your most vocal folks are in some cases, your most tenured folks. don't forget that they crave the coaching just as much as everybody else. So maybe sometimes more, right? They want to continue to get better. They are looking for ways to excel and achieve and improve themselves. Don't shortchange them at the expense of trying to, we want to raise everybody up to the same level, but those folks are looking for that guidance as well. So at CallMiner, we spend a lot of time engaging with our clients on the metrics that matter to them. Gary showed a lot of them in the bouncing balls. Metrics are things that we measure, and they're really, really important. But understanding how the metrics affect the outcomes is even more important. I'd like to leave us with a real world example of how outcomes matter, maybe sometimes more than metrics. So I think as we all can relate in our current times, everyone's looking for ways to reduce costs. One of our newer customers, like so many, came to us with a desire to reduce the operating costs in their contact center. It's usually why you start to automate things and analyze, more holistically. They came with the thinking that the best way for them to achieve that goal was to reduce the overall talk time in their environment. Less time on the phone meant lower costs. They could tangibly see how toll-free and business telephony usage were those costs were racking up. They could take more calls. Maybe they could make more sales if they could reduce the amount of time that their agents were on the phone. They also were convinced that they had agents who were, quote, wasting time on calls, and they wanted to use our solutions to find those areas and squash them. That's no problem. We can totally do that. But through the course of the analysis, they actually learned that the biggest impact to their overall cost wasn't the amount of time that agents were spending on an individual call. It was the fact that the customers had to call multiple times to get all of their issues resolved. Agents had been so ingrained to get off the phone as quickly as they could, they missed the opportunities to make sure that the customer was leaving completely satisfied. By switching their tactics, having the agents spend actually more time on the phone, ensuring that all of the concerns were addressed, they actually cut down on the total number of calls that they had to take. The extra time on the first call meant that they were able to reduce the overall call volume, which exceeded the cost savings that they were hoping to attain. The takeaway, right? Don't look at the metrics in a box. They're really important, but understand the overall goals of the business and look at all the ways to move those needles, right? Monitor and measure those metrics and evaluate the changes to the outcomes over time. If you do that, and you make time to push those learnings to your team in the process, and you continue to ask for their feedback on the changes that are being implemented, as well on what other areas they see to optimize, you can start to action those as best you can in your role. And you can start to move your organization towards delivering more exceptional customer experiences, which in the end is a win for everybody. I started this presentation saying that happy employees translate their attitudes to your customers, but happy customers also reflect back on your agents as well. So it's a win-win for everybody. Thanks, Rachel.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. I'm just going to quickly launch a poll saying, would you like to see a demonstration of the CallMiner solution? If you can just add in your thoughts there. I'm going to stop sharing and go to our top tips. Yeah, thank you, Risa. Amazing presentation. Really interesting to see that kind of the link between employees and customers, measuring and managing as you go. So yeah, thank you so much for that. I'm going to end this poll. And yeah, we've had so many tips and questions, so I'm going to try and whistle through some. So Christina asks, how do you ever find time to involve agents when you're so busy all the time? Some tips would be great. Risa, I think you've kind of covered this.
Yeah, look, Christina, it's really hard to do, right? You're being asked to balance call volumes and talk times and effectiveness and minimizing the after call work, right? It's really hard to squeeze those in. We literally, squeezing them in is sometimes the best way. And that's why we talk about the small coaching nuggets, right? Make those water cooler passing conversations. Obviously we're mostly remote now, but really quick tips, and then just continue to do that over time.
Yeah. Gary, anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's twofold, isn't it? Is it the team leader that's too busy all the time, or the operation that's too busy all the time, or a combination of both? And I think when you start to find yourself in that point, it can be a short-lived strategy not to take people off the phone to develop them, because what they're ultimately going to end up doing is either failing through competency or leaving because they're not getting developed. So I think it's a tough conversation to have with your line manager, with your resource planning team, but I think you have to force the agenda, and really kind of make sure that if it's a priority item, that we find the time to do it. But to Reese's point, that smaller bite-sized sessions can really help if you're pressed for time.
Brilliant. I'm going to try and whistle through some tips. Fiona says, don't always trust the data. Out of depth has access to view full floor stats and can challenge if they think their performance is incorrect. Oh, I'm guessing our department, sorry. Hannah said, while training, have a positive and negative calls for new and current staff to listen to, including call compliance questions. Yeah, I think this is a really good one to be able to share. Yeah, Reese, you're nodding as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we focus so much on the things we want to fix that we forget that most of the time people are doing things well, right? We want to continue to foster that. So
yeah. So Stephen said, in periods when you are overstaffed, pull agents off the phone and have brainstorming and workshop sessions among agents to discuss best practice, leverage agents' experience and ideas. I found that when agents learn from one another, the level of buy-in seems higher. Also, it can give some people an opportunity to display additional skills and can keep them engaged. Yeah, I think, Gary, such an important part, engagement.
Yeah. Peer-to-peer review is one of probably the strongest ways of achieving something to embed, because people like to see what other people are doing well, and they take good stuff from their teams because it's them that are doing it every day. So I think it works well.
Yeah, and I think, don't they call it like 360 feedback, where you get feedback from yourself, your peers, and higher and lower from you. So yeah. We've had a question in from Daniel who said, with a big movement to working from home, have we noticed a big change in productivity or customer experiences? Gary?
You know what, from my experience, there was actually a positive shift in both productivity and customer experience when COVID first hit, and when more people started working from home, because we got more productivity from agents, and people actually gave that more discretionary effort because they were in an environment where they felt that they could thrive more. And I think that's kind of swung back to more of a neutral position now, and in some realms I'm hearing that a loss of productivity. So I think you have to monitor real time some of the challenges, monitor individual agent performance, and just take that balance for agents that are working from home, agents that are hybrid, and the agents that are working in the office, and look at the differences and the uppers and overs to see if that's having a positive or negative impact.
Yeah, and Rita, trying to create that virtual water cooler moment that you were saying about is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. It's right. Very hard to do, but super important. That's actually one of the reasons why I loved coming back into the office, was even just a couple of days a week, was to be able to have those engagements with folks. But you forget sometimes how important they are.
Yeah, I think we've seen people having kind of separate Slack channels almost as a quick drop in, to have that kind of more silly conversations that you're missing out on, to create that engagement that you might be missing from the call center. So John said, make sure to clearly define expectations and standards expected. How can my agents know what I'm measuring if this hasn't been clearly defined? Rhonda said, don't focus on handle time, focus on first call resolution, call control, and quality of the call. Yeah, Risa, I mean, perfectly summed up your final points.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
Barbara said, make sure when you're setting performance improvement goals to set achievable weekly improvement steps to achieve the goal. Decrease talk time by 5 seconds versus decrease talk time by 2 minutes. Final one, Catriona, clearly explain to the CSRs what is expected on each call and how the calls are audited/reviewed. If they know there are certain things that they need to complete on a call, they can improve their scores overall. Yeah, great one. I mean, there's so many tips and questions. I think we're going to have to create an article on this because yeah, it's obviously yeah, a very
subject
important
close to everyone's heart.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we have reached the top of the hour. So if you could write in 1 or 2 words, what did you like best about today's webinar? Our winning tip comes from Brian, who said, where, if possible, involve agents/advisors in setting their own targets metrics, where they buy into the results and outcomes, they will strive to achieve them more. So congratulations, we'll be in touch after the webinar. A reminder, we have a survey, so if you could complete that, it's only 3 questions long and just helps us improve. Lots of people have been asking about the replay and slides. That will be available later on this afternoon on this link. It will also be emailed to you, so don't panic. We're back in a month's time with with one of our webinars, but I just want to say thank you so much to our 2 brilliant speakers. I'm going to call you experts now, so thank you. Thank you, Gary Gormley, for your insights. Yeah. And also to thank you to Risa Elridge from Core Miner. Great to have you online today.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thanks very
Thanks,
much,
everybody.
Rachel.
Brilliant. So thank you very much, everyone, and we will see you all in a month's time. Thank you. Bye.
Take care, folks.